Baik, selamat pagi Ibu Bapak, para tamu undangan dan rekan-rekan mahasiswa yang kami hormati. Mohon izin untuk membuka dan memulai acara kita pagi ini. Pertama-tama salam sejahtera dan selamat datang di kampus kami. Good morning to all of you. Good morning Jessica, selamat pagi and welcome to our campus. Oke, salam kenal untuk Ibu Bapak, para tamu undangan dan rekan-rekan mahasiswa yang barangkali baru pertama kali berjumpa. My name is Monica Madianingrum. I'm a lecturer at the Faculty of Psychology, Sanata Dharma University, and today I have the honor of moderating this international guest lecture presentation. Before we begin, I would like to make a brief introduction of our event today, why we are doing this event and what we would like to see growing out of this event in the future. Jessica, Ibu Bapak, para tamu undangan dan rekan-rekan mahasiswa yang kami hormati, we are having this event as part of the activities being organized to mark the inauguration of our master program in psychology. As we know, in our culture, in many parts of Indonesian culture, to mark the birth of a baby, people will usually invite relatives, friends, neighbors to join them in sharing the joy, the gratitude, and the prayer for the newborn. And people usually have it over a feast, or we call it kenduri. And the gathering, the conversation, which are happening in such an occasion, is usually experienced as a meaningful source of happiness and support for the parent and the family. And that is exactly how we would like to see our event today. We are so grateful and pleased that we can welcome you all at our campus to share with us our joy, our gratitude, and our hopes for our newborn master program in psychology. So thank you. We really appreciate that you have joined us today. And we also feel so fortunate that we are having Jessica as part of our guest. Jessica is actually on her sabbatical leave. So it is really an honor that she decided to stop by at our campus during her leave. So once again, thank you. Terima kasih, Jessica. And in the spirit of sharing joy and hopes for our newborn master program, we would like to invite you to have conversation with us, with each other, around the notion of critical psychology, which is the core idea that we would like to develop and promote in our postgraduate program. And I think in that spirit that Jessica has prepared her presentation to be an interactive session rather than as an one-way lecture. So we would like to invite you to take part in the conversation. And for those joining us through the online platforms, please feel free to share your comments, thoughts, and questions by using the chat box feature. And you are also welcome to speak directly to all of us here. By having this conversation, we hope that our gathering today can stimulate further thoughts, dialogues, exploration, and connections on our shared idea about what does it mean of doing psychology critically in the Indonesian context. As we believe that there is no single and universal version of critical psychology that applies to all contexts and settings. Rather, when preparing this presentation, We believe that critical psychology is always a situated response to the specific socio-historical, political, and cultural context where it is studied, developed, and practiced. So with that, we would like to see the special occasion that we are having today, not as a way of importing the US version of critical psychology into the Indonesian context. Rather, we would like to see it as an opportunity to have a sort of a comparative look on this notion of critical psychology. And hopefully that will generate further reflection and insights for us, something to be contemplated on in the journey of developing our own versions of doing psychology critically in the Indonesian context. So that's the introduction that I would like to share with you all. Now to begin with, first of all, I would like to invite our Dean, Dr. Cahyo Widianto, to extend his welcoming remarks. Pak Cahyo, kami persilahkan.
Sugeng Injang. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen who attend on live or online. Welcome to program Magister Science Psychology Sanata Dharma University. And very grateful today be together in the session of international lecturing in the theme of critical psychology. This event presented by Program Magister Science Psychology Universitas Sanata Dharma in improving spirit to psychology as discipline that option to the justice and humanity. So we would like thank you to Dr. Jesica Fernández for accompanying on this lecturing, and also my deep thank you for everyone who prepared this event well. So have a great discussion and lecturing, and thank you very much.
Terima kasih, Pak Cahyo. Happy birthday. What a special way to celebrate a birthday. Before I hand it over the session to Jessica, I would like to briefly introduce her and her works. Dr. Jesica Fernández is a social community psychologist based in Santa Clara University, California, US. And I think it's not a coincidence that Santa Clara University is also a Jesuit university like Sanata Dharma. Her scholarship and practice have been in the areas of critical community psychology, Latin American and Latino studies, participatory action research, especially with young people, and decolonial psychology. 3 years ago, she was awarded for her student-centered and empowering pedagogy. Her works have been featured in top-tier psychology journals, including the American Journal of Community Psychology, Review of General Psychology, and the Journal of Social Issues. Among her current works is the upcoming Handbook of Decolonial Community Psychology, which I have the privilege of collaborating with her in editing the book. So that a brief introduction of Jessica. Now I would like to invite her to present the lecture. Please, Jessica.
Thank you very much, Dr. Monica Maniandigum for the invitation. And thank you all for your presence and for joining us this morning. My deep, deep gratitude to Dean Cahyo Widianto and also to Father Sulaksana for inviting me and for helping organize this event. I have been welcomed and embraced with so much kindness and generosity by the psychology faculty of this new program. And I am thrilled and deeply, deeply appreciative of the opportunity to be able to celebrate and mark this important moment for you in the making of your new program, a new area of study. You are planting seeds, and when we plant seeds, you need many elements to make that seed grow into a strong and beautiful tree. You need soil, you need the earth, you need water, and you need sun. And it is in community and in collaboration that things grow and nourish. And that is what you are forming and creating together in community. And so I am deeply grateful to have been a part of this beginning journey of planting seeds together. And so with that, I would like to begin sharing with you some of what I have prepared for today, grounded in my understanding of critical psychology. What is critical psychology? What does it look like in the Indonesian context? And why does it matter? And how can we engage in this path towards a critical psychology, a more liberatory psychology, a more humanizing psychology, and a psychology of decolonization, transformation, and justice? Over the past week that I have spent my time here in Indonesia, this is my first time visiting Indonesia, I have had the opportunity to appreciate its deep history, culture, and people. I have learned how the past is connected to the present and how the present is helping shape and inform the future and the vision of this very unique and special country that is deeply inclusive. I have observed as well how Drs. Abraham and Maniantigrum, in a recent publication in the American Psychological Association, describe as an interplay between religion or spirituality and politics and culture in shaping people's personal and collective psyches in ways that are relational, liberatory, and more contextually responsive and responsible. And today I wish to humbly share with you a few reflections on the connections between the past and the present, particularly as these relate to the development of critical psychology in the United States, where I currently live and work. However, I am Mexican. I am an immigrant to the United States. I was born in Mexico, and it is this experience as an immigrant, as a Mexican in the United States that has really helped inform my development, understanding, and praxis as a critical psychologist. Growing up in two countries that were culturally different led me to pursue psychology as a profession, as a career, with the intention to try to understand and contribute to improving the lives of communities, particularly communities of Latin American descent in the United States. History, although often framed as something that happened in the past that we should not even think about because it was a long time ago, is actually very important for helping us understand now and build towards the future. History shapes who and what we are. And in the words of Latin American historian and political writer and critical thinker, Eduardo Galeano, if the past has nothing to say to the present, history may go sleeping undisturbed in the closet where systems continue to hold their own disguises. In other words, if we don't attend to history, to context, there's a way by which injustices continue to repeat and reproduce themselves. The state of psychology in the United States currently is being disturbed and disrupted in its history of complicity with systems of power and oppression, with coloniality, with racism, and with capitalism. And it is these connections that I wish to share with you in the hope that they may be able to help you trace and connect the past and the present in the Indonesian future and in the Indonesian psychology of today. And so usually when I present and anything that I do in my life, I set an intention. And I set the intention to have any action, any expression, anything that I say or do to be guided by my heart. And so I have two intentions to share with you today. And the first is to have us consider and reflect in your own thoughts, in your writing, in your notes, how critical psychology can help bridge knowledge and action towards liberation and justice. And then the second is to demonstrate or consider how psychologists in collaboration with communities can approach research, teaching, and practice in ways that can actually cultivate healing, well-being, and change. So those are my two intentions and hopes for what I will share with you today. And to begin, I have two questions for us to start. The first is an invitation for you to reflect on this guiding question. What words, images, or experiences do you associate with the word critical? What comes to your mind when you hear the word critical psychology? And what does that mean for you? Yeah. So I tend to be very unconventional as a teacher. I love teaching. I teach with my heart. And so I always get my students to move and breathe and feel. So I'm going to invite you to close your eyes or just fix your gaze somewhere in a way that feels right for you. Yes, and same for those that are joining us virtually. Maybe close your eyes, maybe fix your gaze, and try to find your breathing, yeah, your breath and how it's sort of moving through your body. Maybe getting a little bit out of our head and into our heart and into our body and into our breath. And as you breathe, and I say the word critical, what comes to your mind as I say the word critical? What do you see when you hear that word? And then when I say the word critical psychology, what comes to your mind? And now you can open your eyes and maybe we can start briefly by sharing and connecting. So when I said the word critical, what came to your mind? Feel free to share in the language that feels more comfortable for you. I'm here to learn as well. When you stop learning, you stop growing, and I really want to grow.
Okay.
Ya, good morning, selamat pagi, Bapak Ibu sekalian. Terima kasih atas kesempatannya untuk berbagi pendapat saya mengenai refleksi kali ini. Thank you for the opportunity to share my reflection about critical psychology. Well, what comes into my mind about critical psychology, the word critical, only critical, it's free speech especially, where free speech di mana kita punya kebebasan untuk berpikir yang berarti this is kind of relate to US social problem where it's about oppression, right? It's about where our thoughts are oppressed by the authority, you could say, where we are kind of discriminated in a way. Tidak harus secara apa ya, rasial atau secara ya rasial paling terlihat, dan mungkin dari beberapa apa ya, orang punya pemikiran yang dimana untuk memberikan transformasi, kurang lebih we want to transform where we see the injustice in the country or in the macro perspective in the world, like that, where basically critical psychology, we use the knowledge of psychology to share that. So where our, what can I say, cognitive or soul or anything affection are not really freely spoken to the world, where we can freely spoken to the world, because it transforms the world, or it transforms our country in the context of Indonesia or US or Dr. Jessica as Latino, where you live in Mexico in the past. Well, when the question comes, what does it mean to you? It means everything, you know. It's not just critical thinking, but it's morally critical, because we want to live in the world where where our actions are moral. Well, maybe that's all I can say. Mungkin itu aja yang bisa saya bagikan di refleksi kali ini. Terima kasih atas kesempatannya.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Before Bu Monica maybe translate or explain what Bagas mean, I want introduce to all of you that Bagas is the student for the master program in psychology and will be started in July. So we can give the big applause for Bagas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for sharing. Thank you. Thank you.
I will try to translate just briefly. Bagas, selamat datang kembali. Delighted to have you back. So I think you got the first part of what he said, and the other thing that I would like to underline from what Bagas said, that this term of critical psychology, for him, it relates with the notion, with this idea of oppression, and oppression can be in any form, and that not only race-based oppression. So that's the thing that I would like to highlight from what you shared, Bagas.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing with us and being so brave to share what critical means for you, and then what critical psychology means as you pursue this new path in your graduate program. I invite all of you to continue to reflect on this question and what it means in the context of what I will humbly share with you, knowing that I don't have all of the answers. All I have is my experience and my journey to help inform the path that you each will walk on your own journey of developing a critical psychology that is authentic to you to your community and to your collaborations and to your research, right? So how we engage in inquiry, the questions that we ask, the methods that we use, and the actions that follow are all interconnected, right? Question, method, results, and then the outcome. They're all interconnected. And so to assume that how we approach ideas, that the questions that we ask, that the theories that we use, that the methods that we use are devoid of a social and cultural context and a historical past or an ecological structure, to ignore all of that is not to be critical, is not to be conscious, right? So fundamentally, critical psychology is about taking all of that information into account, right? And consistently reflecting and wondering, right? Critical psychology is about being curious and being curious to ask questions in a courageous way with humility and with compassion for the communities that we work with, that we learn from, and that we invite to share their knowledge with us, right? As participants, as quote unquote subjects, right? To not see them as subjects, but rather as holders of knowledge, and that we can co-create knowledge together, right? That is bound by relationality, yes? So now I would like to contextualize critical psychology within the US context in particular, as that is the place where I am situated and where I do my research, even though much of my research is with Latin American communities, because those are the communities that I belong to as well. And so I will offer a general sort of more lecture-like contextualization of critical psychology within this US setting as a way to perhaps help you reflect on this comparative analysis, yes? So first is that critical psychology is rooted in critique, right? It's rooted in fundamentally curiosity, yes? And if we think to our childhood, how many of you have children or have seen children or interact with children from time to time? Raise your hand. Children, kids? Okay, great. What do kids do when they're young? They play. What else do?
They keep asking questions.
They keep asking questions. They are curious. Children are critical psychologists. They are courageous. They are humble. They are always asking questions. They are absorbing knowledge and information consistently, right? Never tired about asking these questions, yeah? And so the first element of critical psychology is that, right? That curiosity, that sense of critique, of asking questions, yes? And this foundation of critique emerged in the 20th century as a response to some of the disillusionment and disappointment by psychologists in the United States that were noticing how many of the social problems that were trying to be addressed through a clinical medical model were actually not addressing the root cause to some of these problems. And so this led to many psychologists resisting this pathological and medicalized model of applying psychology. Medicalized models that were not taking into account treatment, prevention, and cultural context into account. And so critical psychology refuses, and this is the second point, refuses to uphold decontextualized frameworks and instead opts for an ecological analysis of the condition of people suffering that is socially, historically, and contextually situated. The third one is that critical psychology, both in the United States and in the European context, surfaced as a radical response to community struggles for liberation and for human rights. specifically in the context of labor right movements and women's rights movements. The fourth one is that critical psychology is oriented towards a critique and analysis of power, and how power is really at the root of many of these injustices and inequities. And it must be noted, however, that critical psychology is rooted in movements for liberation and for transformation, and that many of these movements, although led by scholars and practitioners, are really truly led by communities and by people outside of the university, outside of the academy. And this was certainly the case of critical psychology in the Latin American context, which is where a lot of the critical psychology in the United States developed its foundations in. And that certainly speaks to my own journey into critical psychology, where as a graduate student, I was working with Latin American communities, and the psychological theories and perspectives that I was learning as a graduate student that were focused and based on European white American communities and participants were not relevant or applicable to the Latin American immigrant communities that I was working with. And I was finding this tension. How many of you have ever tried a shoe and the shoe doesn't fit? It's either too small or too big or too uncomfortable. Are you going to keep wearing that shoe? Probably not. Right? Unless you have no other option, maybe. And so I didn't want to continue to try to fit this shoe of United States Western psychology to try to understand the experiences of Latin American communities. So I turned to Latin American cultural studies and Latin American liberation psychology, critical social political psychology in Latin America. The work of Ignacio Martín Baró, Maritza Montero, David Pablo Cuellar, and many others, right? To help inform my understanding of the possibilities of a critical psychology in the United States and bringing these different disciplines together to help me better understand and better serve and support the communities that I was engaged in research. Yeah. And if at any point you have questions or thoughts, please raise your hand. This is a conversation. I have information to share, and I also assure you that you have a lot more information to share with me as well. So this is a dialogue. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. My name is Banu Batrika. I'm same with Bagas, student of master degree as well. So I would like to ask to Dr. Jesica, how do you think about Indonesian community that we are is post? I think we are Indonesian is a post-colonial community. We have been ruled by the Western for 1,000 years, and then I think it's the same with the Latin people in South America. So as Indonesian people, I sometimes feel traumatized to communicate with Western people because in my unconscious mind, it's like I don't know the term, but I think it's like a community traumatized about being ruled by Western, and then being post-colonial trauma, I think. So I curious about how I'm a Latin immigrant in US can survive, and then how can they make a deal with Western people domination and power. So yeah, I just curious about it because I think Indonesian people and Latin people have a similar history. We have been ruled by Spain as well, and then by the Dutch, by the British, and then the last we have been ruled by Japanese. So it's traumatized for us to become post-colonial community. How to deal about it? Because if we want to reflection our community, that kind of trauma pop up again, and it's like a mental block to understand our community. Thank you, Dr. Jessica.
You can address directly, Jessica, please, or if you need uh, trans translation, then I'm happy to help. But yeah.
Thank you for that question and for the courage in asking that question and saying the word that many people have a hard time saying wherever they are, especially if we are survivors of coloniality, which is colonialism. It's like a word that people are hesitant to name, even though coloniality outlives colonialism, has a way of manifesting itself in the present in various forms. As you said, with that memory of trauma and the silence that remains when we don't unearth those histories of wounding and of violence. What I will offer is a reflection on the ways in which I have tried to support Latin American communities in the United States that still feel that wound and that pain of coloniality. Some people consider Latin America post-colonial. I believe that it's still a colonial context because coloniality demands a consistent critique and reflection and refusal to remain silent. And I choose the decolonial standpoint to undo the violence and the trauma of coloniality. We need to rethink our social condition. We need to rethink the terms under which communities and groups are situated and why. We need to uncover the practices that communities have practiced for many, many years, even before coloniality took place. We need to uncover and recover that so that they know that they have tools, that they have power, and that they have the strengths and the capacities to affirm and empower and heal themselves in a way that is true and authentic to their own cultural traditions and practices. And in some cases, create a syncretic combination of the Western or the modern practices with the traditional indigenous cultural practices, and to bring them together as a hybrid to help them understand that social condition and to help them create a more empowering, a more healthy and wholesome experience. And I believe that critical psychology can help address that, can help understand that there are multiple forms of knowing, that there are multiple forms of asking questions, of doing research, of engaging in methodologies, and even of sharing information. Not everything needs to be in a publication form. Yes, a publication is important, but we can share knowledge in so many other ways. Some of the communities that I work with don't speak Spanish. They speak their native indigenous language. I don't speak it. Even though my grandmother has indigenous roots, It stopped with my grandmother. We lost that. But there's a way to recover it, right? And so it's a process. It's a process of undoing, right? When we are cooking, sometimes we have to use onion. I don't use onion because I have a very bad allergy, but when you are cooking, you use an onion, right? And when you are peeling the onion, some of us cry, right? Some of us cry because it's so strong, but you know you need that onion to make a very good, the traditional meal, right? And so it takes sometimes that effort and a little bit of that struggle to reach to that point. Yeah. So I offer that reflection. It's not an answer, it's just a reflection, right? And together, you will create your own answers. But it also speaks to this important quote by Ian Parker. Where did it go? By Ian Parker, who is a critical psychologist. And he wrote that critical psychology must draw connections between different analyses of how psychological knowledge is constructed and how that knowledge functions politically. The exploration of how everyday ordinary psychology structures academic and professional work in psychology, and how everyday activities must provide the basis of resistance to contemporary practices. In other words, what does it mean? This basically means that psychology is a psychology of everyday being. We are constantly engaging in psychology because it requires taking into account our everyday experiences, right? And so how can we create opportunities for us to co-learn and co-create in a way that takes into account the complete holistic human experience? And this also speaks to a quote by decolonial scholar Nelson Maldonado Torres, who said, and I quote, "New ideas must be approached in integrated ways. We must combine knowledge, practice, and creative expression, where colonization and dehumanization demand a holistic movement that involves reaching out to others, communicating, and organizing a new kind of knowledge and critique that are a part of an entirely different paradigm of being, acting, and knowing in the world." So if as psychologists, we agree with these principles of justice, of liberation, of doing no harm, which are fundamental to social, community, and individual well-being, then we really must align our practice to advance those goals. We must align our questions, our theories, and our methods towards that liberatory standpoint. And we must pursue a critical psychology that challenges power, right? Power not as necessarily as an idea, but power as a system that grew out of colonial relationships, of positioning and creating these hierarchies of power and privilege, right? In various forms, whether that's about race or gender or class, yeah? And some of you have asked, yes, you have a question, please.
It's also our alumnum.
I see.
Sister her postgrad in our university.
Good morning.
All right. Good morning, Dr. Fernández and Dr. Madianingrum, and my beloved lecturer here in this room. I'm Martha, and I'm the alumni of psychology in Sanata Dharma University, and I'm really curious about the issue or contextualization about the power and oppression in community psychology, critical community psychology. What I address or what I want to discuss is there are two topics. The first one is about the colonialization. It's because the internalization of the colonization is very deep, and sometimes it's layered. Yeah, so we cannot change the colonialization into the decolonialization only with one way. Yeah, because it's really systemic. It's not only experienced in the individual level, but also in the groups, in the family, and in the macro level, like government and the political system, like that. And how we as a psychology practitioner in critical community psychology addressed it, and how we can be so really critical to see it. Yeah, because yeah, as a psychology practitioner, we also need to critical about the psychology itself. Yeah. And also the second one, the topic that I am so curious in critical psychology is about the power relation. So according to the Michael Foucault conceptualization about the power relation, that the power relation is not only experienced in between the group, like the subordinate and ordinate group, or between the government and the minority group, between majority or minority, but also it can be experienced within the individuals, like even in the therapy room, between psychotherapy and the client, or within the spouse, like between the girlfriend, boyfriend, or wife or husband, like that. And also it experience within the layer. So each individual has different layers of power and operations, like that. Maybe for example, in the even it's in the minority group, for example in the immigrant group, within themselves, the layer of operation is also different. And I'm so really curious how critical psychology can address it, and or maybe you have like example or experiences from your work in the immigrant issue about this, about the power relation operation and the colonialization. Yeah, that's what I want to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. I appreciate that question because it gets now at the practice of it, right? We can talk about these ideas in a theoretical way. We can contextualize it and situate it. But now the challenge, and I would say the beauty and the fun comes with now, how do you apply it? Well, how do you actually do this thing of critical psychology? Or how do you actually engage in a decolonial standpoint? In a way that's not theoretical or just talk, right? We need to walk the talk. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move forward a bit to provide some examples of how we can begin to do this. Examples that are guided from my own experience and from my own work in a way that perhaps might help you think about how you can do it in your work, in your context, in your life. Because power is relational. Power exists in relationships, it exists in systems, and it exists in institutions. We have been socialized into different cultural societies and practices to reproduce these forms of power in ways that are very unconscious to us. As children, as people with different identities, as a woman, as an immigrant, so on and so forth, right? And so we need to take all of that into account. And that really requires, in my experience, developing an ethical, reflexive practice of questioning, why is this happening? Why does this continue to happen? What can I learn from this? What is the root of this experience or situation or condition of power, right? And when you can begin to ask those questions from a place of not criticality necessarily, more so from a place of curiosity because you want to learn. Because sometimes when you say critical, people think that you are criticizing them, that you are labeling them as someone who is bad or someone who is oppressive or evil. But the reality is that sometimes people are not conscious even of how they are reproducing power. Because if you're in a clinical setting and you're seeing a therapist, the therapist has every intention to try to help you, to try to make you feel better and healthy. So they are using the skills and the training that they were trained to use in that context, right? And so you cannot necessarily blame them because they are a product of their environment and how they've been trained and socialized. Instead, what you can begin to do is you can begin to try to understand, can we develop a different relationship in this therapeutic practice environment where I feel deeply recognized as a human being at the same time as I deeply recognize you as a human being? And instead, can we have an authentic and honest conversation about something that is difficult for me, right? Can we engage in what a good friend of mine, scholar Dr. Diane Bell, describes humanizing reciprocal recognitions? Humanizing reciprocal recognitions, recognizing the mutuality of our shared humanity and our shared conditioning, and begin to develop practices grounded in that reflexivity and that mutual reflection. And this is something that Frantz Fanon also talked about, right? That violence is a outcome of power, right? And it requires us thinking differently and thinking otherwise, right? And asking communities, what are the practices and ways of knowing that they themselves already engage in, and adapting and adjusting those in a way that actually meets the community where they are. That we are not imposing a particular solution or treatment, but that we are being curious and open to see what is it that they are already doing, that maybe they need help or support doing better, that maybe the training that I have as within a Western psychology can adapt or change to create something new, right? Decolonization is not the absence of something. Decolonization is the transformation of the colonial condition and the radical imagination of something different. Oftentimes people think that decolonization is critique. It's you have to eliminate this, you have to get rid of that. That's the same as coloniality. Coloniality got rid of things, got rid of people, got rid of land, got rid of resources. So when we begin to think about decolonization as the absence of something or the elimination of fill in the blank, we are reproducing the same paradigm. Instead, we need to think of decolonization as a radical imagination of something new that you are not doing on your own, but you are doing in community with many through these relationships. And relationships that will consistently require that you engage in an ethical reflexivity, right? This has been my experience, and this is how I approach both a critical psychology and a decolonial orientation. Knowing that there will be times where mistakes will happen, and that's okay because we are learning together. And it is in the journey of falling that we rise up again and keep going. Right? So I don't know if that answered or offered some reflections or ideas for you.
Ini Brahma di 1980 masih rendah, Pak. Terus di tua juga masih 2000. Masih sekitar 100-an lah kalau dengan BBU, Pak. Masih tinggi SPBU sih. Gimana, Pak?
You're very welcome. And it's a practice that you should develop and nurture consistently. And that many of us already do it. Many of us are already engaged in this process of thinking and pondering and being curious, activating that childhood inside of us for the questions that we ask, how we ask them, right? And holding back any assumption that we might be wanting to make that is at the end not necessarily going to serve us in the interest of transformation and liberation. Right? Other thoughts or questions related to what I have here in terms of, critical psychology as pedagogy, right? As you develop and form the curriculum for the critical psychology graduate program, you can incorporate a critical ethical reflective practice into your assignments, into your conversations, into the activities within the context of your learning, right? And that requires something even as simple as what I did at the beginning of our conversation today, which was to close your eyes, find your breath, and think about what you're thinking, right? Even something as small as that can go a long way to help you develop that capacity for an ethical reflexivity, right? Because sometimes we might find ourselves in a situation where we don't feel comfortable, and we oftentimes don't feel comfortable because there's some dynamic of power coming through, right? So we need to be able to understand what is surfacing for me and why, and how can I address it so that I don't cause harm to that person or to that group, right? And we catch ourselves in that journey. Yeah.
Silakan Ibu Bapak, barangkali ada tanggapan lain, refleksi lain. Or you may continue. Probably later on, there will be more thoughts and reflections being shared. Jessica.
Thank you. So critical psychology as pedagogy is one strategy. The next one, and this is an example of critical psychology as an ethical reflexive practice. I will talk more about this in the workshop later today. So I will hold time for that in the workshop that will be more interactive and more dynamic. But critical psychology as pedagogy, integrating it into the curriculum, integrating it into your courses. I integrate a lot of critical ethical reflexivity in my courses with my students, especially as they are doing participatory action research in the university. The University of Santa Clara expresses cura personalis. Very good. But sometimes it doesn't do cura personalis that good. Sometimes they need help. And me and my students, we work together to help them see that they really need to practice cura personalis. So we do participatory action research, and we use photo voice as a methodology that involves taking photographs and adding narratives or stories to those photographs to help students document experiences of racism, of discrimination, of sexism in the university, especially as Latino students, as African American, and as Asian students. They experience a lot of discrimination, so they do photo voice to capture those moments of discrimination and share their stories. And so this is one of the ways in which an ethical reflexive practice is being facilitated as a way for students to learn that when they don't feel like they belong in the university, is not about them. It's about the university not creating an environment that is inclusive and that is affirming of their fullest humanity as non-European, non-white students, right? And they're developing that critical, ethical, reflective practice through the method of photo voice. And they present this information to the university. And now the university can see concretely what is the problem, what is the situation, and then how they can work to address it. They can work to address it by creating events and curriculum that is oriented towards an affirmation of the history, the culture, and the knowledge of these students that feel marginalized, right? Of creating cultural events that support students, of creating grants and scholarships to support students, especially of providing students with financial aid and financial support, right? So these are some of the strategies and examples from my own work. Knowing, of course, that I'm constantly learning, and I'm constantly learning, especially from my students. They teach me so much, and this work cannot be done without students because they are the experts. I am not a student. So they lead the way and I follow and I support them, right? That to me is a critical psychology, the capacity to take a step back, create a condition for those who are on the margins or are impacted by the system, by the issue, be the ones that are helping to visualize the path towards that solution. And together, we make that solution, right? Again, decolonization as the creation of something different and better, not the absence of something. The next strategy is critical psychology in practice, right? A critical psychology that is about engaging in methods that are emancipatory, methods that are socially and contextually situated and relevant, methods that involve the whole person, right? Methods that are relational, that are grounded in a strengths-based approach rather than a deficit perspective, that are centered on community knowledge rather than positioning the researcher or academia as the answer or the solution to all problems, right? Going back to that story about the shoe that doesn't fit. If I really want to help and support and cultivate the well-being and the health of Latin communities that I work with, the methods, the theories, the paradigms that I use need to be adapted in a way that is socially, culturally, and contextually relevant so that we together can understand and create. And sometimes that requires engaging in emancipatory methodologies. That is, using methods that communities themselves are familiar with or have already been using, but they just don't call it a method. For example, I work in a community with mostly Mexican immigrant moms. Many of them are immigrants. Many of them only speak Spanish. Some of them speak a little bit of Spanish because they speak their indigenous language from Mexico. And we collaborated on a project, a participatory action research project, where many of these moms were experiencing poor health outcomes. They were having a hard time breathing. They were experiencing depression, anxiety, many problems, both physical, psychological, and emotional. And they were also experiencing problems in the school where their children were not receiving the adequate support and the necessary resources to help them in their learning. So these moms were very, very stressed. They were worried about their children. They were worried about themselves. This project also started when President Trump, well, he's not president anymore, but when Trump was president. And so there was a lot of fear that they were going to be deported and separated from their families. So it was a very traumatizing moment for the community. And so Santa Clara University has this mission of serving communities on the margins and advancing social justice mission. And it was through this mission, through this collaboration, that we joined a group of moms to develop a course where they learned how to do participatory action research. So I taught the course that I was teaching my university students. I taught the same course to a group of 15 moms in the community in Spanish. And then I brought my students and the moms together. And with support from my colleague, Dr. Laura Nichols, her and I and our students from Santa Clara University came together with a group of moms, and we developed these projects where the moms were researching why were their students, their children, not having support in the school, where they research why was their neighborhood consistently being policed, why was there always police constantly in the neighborhood, what were these experiences of insecurity, why were many of them not having access to housing and to food because they didn't have rights or citizenship or documentation. So we developed these projects. The moms led the way. They were the ones that were doing the surveys to others in their community, to their neighbors. They were the ones that were doing the field notes and the field work, the ethnographic work. They were the ones that were interviewing each other and talking to each other because they know each other. They live with each other in community. I'm an outsider. My colleague is an outsider. The university students are outsiders. So we trained them and we provided them with the support and the tools so that they become the researchers of asking those questions, of engaging in those methodologies. And we didn't even call them surveys. We didn't call them interviews. They were calling it conversations. They were calling it gossip time, right? Chit chat, coffee time, right? They were having these conversations as part of their everyday life, right? And so these are methods that communities themselves already do. The moms were already meeting every morning over coffee to talk about what was happening in their lives. You could call it a focus group, right? And so how can we bring these ideas together in a syncretic way to build that bridge? And so we developed all of these projects. And after they presented the results of their projects, of their research, they were so inspired and so motivated to share what they learned that they decided to create a mural, a big mural in the community to tell that story. And so the picture you see here is of the mural they created. They created a huge mural with their children, with the community, with a local artist to tell that story, to tell the story about their struggles with not finding their struggles with not finding access to housing, right? Their struggles with being immigrants and away from their home country, their love for their family, right? And so all of the things that they documented in their research was depicted in this mural. And so what I want to share with you next is a very short 2-minute video about the moms expressing themselves about the mural. The video is in Spanish and in English. And I would be grateful for any translations that can be offered to the English portion. But this gives you an example of what does it mean to engage in a critical psychology through a decolonial standpoint in a way that involves emancipatory methodologies. That's one of the moms who's being interviewed about the process and her experience in making the mural. So we had a celebration in community to mark the creation of this mural. That's another mom talking about her experience in the research project and why it was important for her to represent the mural. And this is the local muralist with whom we collaborated to create the mural, right? So it's about bringing the community together to create something new that affirms a community in a moment in time with this, when this community, the Mexican, the Latin American communities were being targeted. And so that's one example of how we can engage in this process of critical psychology through the use of emancipatory methodologies. Thank you. I'm wondering if there are questions or perhaps you can offer a translation, Monica, please.
Thank you, Jessica. Ibu Bapak, dipersilakan barangkali what have been shared by Jessica somehow spark some reflection or insights or comments. Please feel free to share with us. If you like to share it in Bahasa Indonesia, you are most welcome. Adakah yang ingin membagikan refleksi? Or perhaps we have some comments or questions from those who join us virtually? Not yet? Okay. Please, Martha.
The ethical reflective practice in the emancipatory methodologies is very great practice, because, and also when I remember some of the phenomenon in Indonesia, such as when I follow a class like a seminar, and the presenter talks about the polygamy phenomenon in Indonesia, and there is a man, there was a man at that time that asked like, do the woman in the polygamy phenomenon feels like enjoy that? So it's a ridiculous question for me. Yeah, because in that time, our thought is like the women is the survivor for the polygamy and other practices, that injustice practices. And that question make me think that how we can make sure that the women, or the position of the women, that she want it or she do not want it, with her free will or not, how we can examine it. Because women can say like, oh yeah, I enjoy it, but I assume that why she can't answer like that, because it's the internalization or colonialization system that she experienced like that. But after I watch your work, and after I hear your explanation about the emancipatory methodologies, I think that like gossip, chit chat, and other conversation in the daily life for certain issues that are sensitive and controversial within the women issue, we can use it rather than instead of just interview like that. Because if we use like only interview, we cannot know is it true or not, or it's or the answer of the survivor or participant in the research is just the result of the colonialization system like that. And that's the first thing. And the second thing that I want to ask is about maybe your personal experience as a minority individual, how you can survive in the US with the majority people in there. I believe that many tears and many struggle that you faced before as a minority individual, and how you can cope with that, and how you can break the oppression, and how you can embrace other groups and other people to joining you and together to break the oppression and discrimination. Thank you.
Thank you. Terima kasih,
Thank
Marta.
you very much.
Please, you can go, Jessica.
Thank you for that two very deep and big questions. Very thought-provoking. I will say that it is really important for us as researchers to deconstruct the assumptions that we make about communities and individuals as passive in their capacities to produce and co-create knowledge, and in their capacities and in their agency and power to heal and liberate themselves. I see myself as a critical community psychologist, as a facilitator for communities to create conditions where they can recognize their power and their agency to live their lives differently, and to care and support each other, and to develop the skills and the tools to amplify that and expand that and apply it and share it. When I do research collaborations, my intention is to work my way out of that role, to basically become unemployed so that the communities themselves are now sustaining themselves in that work that they're doing, that they don't no longer need me as the outsider to do that. But now they're doing it and they're sharing it with each other because they talk to each other and they see each other and they live with each other in the same neighborhood and in the same community. And I don't have the capacity to expand myself because I'm an academic, I'm a teacher, I'm a researcher, I'm everything and anything that students need, right? Sometimes I'm a doctor, sometimes I'm a mom, whatever students need, I have to be there because I love teaching. So for me, it's important to be creative about, okay, how can we develop a project or a collaboration where they are already doing things for themselves that can be reimagined as an emancipatory methodology. Because I know they are more comfortable talking with each other about sensitive topics than they are talking with an outsider. As much as they appreciate me and we have a good relationship and we care about each other, I don't have their same lived experience. I don't share the same identities as them. Many of them are much older than I am. They are all moms. I haven't been privileged or blessed with being a mom, right? Many of them are immediate immigrants that just immigrated to United States. I have lived many years in the United States. I have citizenship and documentation. Many of them do not, right? And that's a topic that many of them are very protective about talking about because they don't want to be deported or separated from their families, but they can talk about that with each other, right? So one of the philosophies by which I do my research and I teach this to my students and to my community collaborators is never ask a research question and never ask a question in a survey, in a focus group, in an interview that you yourself would not be comfortable answering or asking. It's about relational ethics, an ethic of care. And if you are wanting to be courageous and bold and still ask the question, perfect time for a ethical critical reflexivity for you. Why do you really want to ask that question? What are you trying to learn or get out of that question that you want to ask, that you yourself are not comfortable asking? What are you trying to get at? Is there a different way of asking that question? Can someone from the community or from that group that you're trying to understand help you develop a better, more appropriate question? It really comes down to being humble in our practice. And recognizing that just because we have a PhD or a degree, or we've been in school for many, many, many years, and we wrote books and articles and this and that, that we are somehow an expert or that we need to be arrogant. That harms us. And it harms our communities. And it prevents us from actually being humanizing people and true psychologists, right? If psychology is about improving the human condition, mind, heart, body, then we should try to embody that, right? Through these fundamental human principles of humility, right? Now, to your second question about how am I able to do this work in the United States as a minority, it's a constant reminder of the sacrifices that my parents made to provide me and my brothers and my family with opportunities by immigrating, reminding myself of where I come from, my roots, my family, my community, and that there have been many other people that came before me that also struggled, that also sacrificed, that also challenged to help me be where I am now. I wouldn't be where I am now had it not been for all the other immigrants, all the other women that helped shape the path. And now I am trying my best to help shape the path for my students, for my community collaborators, and not just trying to pave this path in the United States, but trying to pave this path in other contexts too, in other environments, in other relationships. Because I believe truly in the words of Angela Davis. She was a political survivor who in the 1960s was incarcerated for her activism as a Black woman trying to fight the injustices and the racism in the United States. She was a political prisoner, wrongfully accused, but she survived. She says, freedom is a constant struggle. And that gives me radical hope to continue every day to be motivated. Every day I'm constantly learning. And that also brings me back to that value of humility and why I'm doing what I'm doing and why it matters. Perhaps justice and liberation will not be actualized completely. And that's okay, because new challenges will arise, but it's that persistence and that commitment and that relationality of care and that reciprocal humanizing recognition that gives me inspiration and motivation. The fact that I have colleagues like Monica who are doing similar work to engage in these emancipatory methodologies, to engage in a different way of doing psychology is inspiring. It's very motivating. When I see moms doing the work with each other, or when I see my students applying it, you're planting seeds. So that motivates me. Planting seeds, hoping that some of them are going to grow to be great, delicious fruits. Others might be strong, big trees, and others might just, be very small and they're going to make their way somehow. That's okay. So it's about that. That's what motivates me, right? I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Jessica. It's been really generous reflection that you share with us. Personally, sitting here listening to you, it doesn't feel at all that as if I'm in a public lecture. I don't know with you all, but personally, I feel like I've been attending like an academic retreat or something like that, and it's been great. Yeah, and I noticed few of our undergraduate students are also joining. Thank you for making time to joining us. So it'll be great as well if no pressure at all, but I'm just wondering if maybe any of you would like to share your reflection, what comes to your mind, participating in this conversation. No pressure though. Yes, sure. You feel free to share your thoughts, your reflection, your comments in Indonesian language. We can help with we try as best as we could to translate your reflection. Yeah, feel free. Either way that you are most comfortable, in English or in Indonesian. Okay, please, Sanggar.
given to me. My name is Komang Sata Aditya. I'm here as an undergraduate student of psychology major in University of Sanata Dharma. So I wouldn't. I have a questions because there's something that I am very curious about. Earlier at the beginning of the lectures, Dr. Fernandez, you assert that there's some European traditional psychological framework that is incompatible in trying to explain the situation that you experience when dealing with Latin community. So I'm curious what sort of framework that is incompatible, and so I would like to ask you for elaboration in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanggata. That's the question, Jessica.
Thank you for that question. So what I was referring to in the beginning with regards to some psychological frameworks not being relevant or applicable to Latin American communities are that some of these psychological frameworks would focus on deficits, right? What are the limitations of Latin American communities? So for example, one very common theory in social psychology, very famous theory, and a very good theory by all means, is Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory. How many of you are familiar with that theory? Right? Basic social psychological theory. It's a great theory, right? It's useful. But in trying to apply that theory to understand the experiences of Latin American communities, there was a big piece missing. It didn't take into account the socio-historical context that led to these waves of immigrants from Mexico to the United States. It's as if it begins at the macro, exo, and meso. It's as if all communities exist within these systems, but these systems exist within a much longer, bigger history. So where is that history in that system? Where does it, and how does it make space for the experiences of non-European immigrants within this ecological perspective? And what is the relationship between these systems and the fact that these systems contributed to the economic precarity and the economic injustice in Mexico that then led to that pattern of migration? So where is the history in this ecological system theory? That was my question. And when I went to my advisor and I said, this theory, I'm trying to use it and I really want to use it, but it's very limiting because it doesn't take into account the history. I cannot talk about the experiences of Latinos, of Latin Americans in the United States without talking about the history, without talking about the ways in which the United States contributed to the economic injustices in Mexico that then led to those patterns of migration back then, historically, and then still in this present moment. So if we want to address problems, for example, like immigration, we need to understand the system, but we also need to contextualize it in history. There's a very famous quote that was a part of a movement in the UK, a liberatory movement in the 1960s. We were here because you were there, right? So Latin Americans are in the United States because somehow the United States was also in Latin America, and it contributed to the crumbling of Latin American institutions, economic, social, and so on. People don't leave their countries because they want to. They leave their countries as immigrants, in some cases because they don't have any better choice. And so that was a missing piece for me in that Bronfenbrenner theory. Another theory, community psychology is very passionate about empowerment theory. In the United States, empowerment theory in community psychology is number one. I had a very difficult time applying empowerment theory in my work with Latin American communities. Because the assumption of empowerment theory is that communities don't have power. And so the role of the researcher is to empower them. But the communities do have power, but they express and manifest that power in different ways. In some cases, they want to express and manifest and exert that agency and that power, but the context or the environment is not created to support them in expressing and engaging in that agency and in that power. So this is where liberation psychology perspectives, where the work of Maritza, Dr. Maritza Montero, Concientización, Paulo Freire's work become really important. Okay. So that was my experience with some of the existing theories that I found useful and limiting, and why I needed to integrate a more transdisciplinary orientation, which brings me close to my last few points, which is the importance of engaging in a decolonial orientation that is centered around transdisciplinarity, of sharing knowledge, of building bridges, of connecting different areas of inquiry, different theories, different perspectives, different histories, to find these threads and to build these bridges towards a more humanizing psychology that is not a Western psychology, but a psychology that is socially, culturally, and contextually and politically situated. And that brings me to the collaborative project that I have been privileged and honored to be a part of with Monica, Doctors Christopher San, James Ferreira Moura in Brazil, and many others across many different countries, to think about psychology differently and to share knowledge and information with each other, to expand the canon of psychology. In the words of Monica, to undiscipline the discipline, right? And to learn in community and in relationship with one another. And that involves engaging in these set of orientations or practices, which are to engage in a critical ethical reflexivity consistently, right? How do you do a decolonial critical psychology? Engaging in a critical reflexivity, thinking about what you're thinking. Why are you thinking what you're thinking? What kinds of questions are you asking? Why are you asking those questions, those methods? Centering local community knowledge, using community knowledge, practices, experiences, and relationships to support the research process. Critical participatory action research, or a version of participatory collaborative research involving community members, involving quote unquote subjects in the research. And transdisciplinarity, bringing knowledge, theories, perspectives, paradigms from other disciplines of study. It helps, right? Because sometimes what we develop in psychology has also been developed in sociology, has been developed in anthropology, right? And information and knowledge begins to circulate. One of the questions that I have been having in my mind and in my heart during my visit here has been this big question about how does knowledge circulate? How does knowledge move? Who gets to decide what knowledge counts as knowledge? And where does it go? Often it's determined by those who are in positions of power or are perceived and positioned as experts. So we need to reframe that and think that we all have knowledge to share. We all have perspectives to offer. And we all have the capacity to share and expand and broaden that knowledge. I have been incredibly inspired, truly inspired, by the work of political survivor an artist, Joko Petik. We had the privilege of seeing his art collection. And I was both inspired, but also deeply troubled by the fact that that is a story of a political survivor and an artist that merits being known worldwide. So why do we not know more about him outside of the Indonesian context? We must. We must. So I've committed myself to help contribute to that circulation of that knowledge because it's a story worth knowing, right? And I'm sure many of you have so many other stories to share. And so this is the work that is still a work in progress. We are consistently learning, right? And building on these decolonial orientations towards a more critical, humanizing, liberatory psychology. And the last slide that I will end with, and then open it up for questions and more dialogue, is that critical psychology can begin with community-centered, culturally relevant, historically and politically, socially situated forms of inquiry, of curiosity, of humility, to acknowledge the socio-historical context of where knowledge is produced, to disrupt systems of power that overlook community agency. And I hope that I have provided you with some very concrete strategies by which you can disrupt power: critical ethical reflexivity, emancipatory methodologies, engaging in transdisciplinarity, co-creating knowledge, and resisting paradigms that undermine community knowledge and ways of being, and that instead foster well-being towards a process and an experience of liberation. And so with that, I will end with one question, which is, what is the past and present development of Indonesian critical psychology or psychology in general? How does it converge or diverse with critical psychology in the US and in other places as well, in Latin America, in Europe, and beyond? So these are the two questions that I humbly offer us to think about, not now, but beyond. And lastly, my deep, deep gratitude to Monica, to the dean, to the president, to the faculty of psychology, to the University of Sanata Dharma, and to all of you present today and virtually who shared this moment and this time with me. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Jessica. We still have about 10 minutes. If perhaps there is still some really urging questions or reflections that you would like to share with us before we close our guest lecture session today. Personally, for me, Jessica, sitting here listening to you, somehow it has brought me to this reflection that colonization is not only about foreign power invade our territory or our humanity, but it's also how we as fellow citizens, as fellow Indonesian, might have consciously or unconsciously sustaining, reproducing, amplifying in some way any sorts or any forms of colonization, whether be race-based, religious-based, political orientation-based, or gender-based. So that's the very questions that I think will be something that I will bring on from this lecture. So thank you. Muchas gracias, if I'm saying it correctly. Muchas
Yes,
gracias.
muchas gracias. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you very much.
Please, Ibu Bapak, apakah masih ada rekan-rekan mahasiswa? Barangkali masih ada 5 menit. Baik, kalau tidak ada, Ibu Bapak izinkan untuk menutup acara kita hari ini. I think as a moderator, I would not make any conclusion about what we have discussed and shared in this forum. Before we officially closing the session, I just like to once again thank you all for all the wonderful questions, comments, and thoughts, reflection that have been shared and enriching our conversation. We really, really hope that this event is just a beginning of continued connections and dialogues. Once again, thank you for participating in this event. And Jessica, we couldn't thank you enough for your generosity and the passion that you brought into this session. Hopefully it's just the beginning of more visits to Indonesia, to Sanata Dharma in the future. So once again, I would like to invite you to give a round of applause for Jessica. Thank you. Hi.
Thank you very much. I would like to offer just one last thing, which is a poem. And it's in indigenous Nahuatl language. And the phrase in Nahuatl is Inlakesh. Inlakesh means you are my other me. And there's a poem that goes with this word, which says, you are my other me. Tú eres mi otro yo. If I do harm to you, I do harm to myself. If I love and respect you, I love and respect myself. And so thank you, Inlakesh, for inviting me and for allowing me to learn. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Terima kasih, Ibu Bapak. Sekali lagi para tamu undangan dan rekan-rekan mahasiswa yang kami hormati. Demikian keseluruhan acara International Guest Lecture Presentation hari ini. Selamat melanjutkan aktivitas, salam sehat, dan sampai jumpa di kesempatan yang lain. Terima kasih.
Thank you so much, Monica. Thank you. Thank you. You've been so generous. This was more than I could have imagined. Thank you.
I was just sitting here being speechless. Like you come just one after another with question that make us like, wow, yes, so true. It's just like, yeah, Jessica,
Thank you.
we can feel that you truly are speaking from your heart.
Oh, thank you.
You're speaking with your body. You're
Oh, thank
speaking
you.
with your soul. And
Thank you.
people feel that despite the language.
Oh, thank you
despite
very
the-
much. That is my intention, that I can reach people through the heart,
Yeah,
because it's the only language that can speak.
beautiful. People can feel.
Thank you.
That's okay.
Thank you.